always good to have you back for another day as we are continuing on with our Bible study through the book of Nehemiah, reConstruct. You can join us on this journey, and we would absolutely love to have you. All you need to do is visit that URL right there, go.christtable.today/reconstruct. There you'll find the reading plan and everything that you need to know in order to join us on this journey. Or you can just tune in wherever you're watching from, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, even on our website at www.christtable.today. And we are glad to have you along for the ride. Today we find ourselves on day 10 in Nehemiah chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. What we found over the last few days is that the wall construction that Nehemiah is working on has been going well. They're more than halfway through now with constructing the wall, but the resistance to the wall has been increasingly strong, and so resources have had to be increased and also diverted, not just from construction, but now also to safety and security. And so people are doing double duty in that they are not just building the wall on a shift, but now they're also taking shifts in protection and security. They're working until the stars came out, which means that they're working from daylight well into the dark. And many of the people, the text tells us, have also had to now place themselves in a living situation temporarily in the city and have been disallowed from going home. And the sun this morning is, it's quite strong here. You can't even see when, so let's try and position this mic in such a way where the sun allows me to be seen. Welcome to a sunny day here in Florida. Now, as we come into the text, we are going to see this situation continue to get worse on the inside, so that now Nehemiah is not just dealing with pressure from the outside, but he's also now dealing with increasing pressure from the inside as well. And so let's go ahead and begin in our text today. Nehemiah chapter 5, verse 1. About this time, some of the men and their wives raised a cry of protest against their fellow Jews. They were saying, "We have such large families, we need more food to survive." What seems to be happening here is that there is a famine. Now, whenever we hear the word famine, oftentimes we kind of make this assumption that a famine is caused by a red level climate situation. So there's been maybe no rain, too much sun, some other catastrophic climate event that has caused there to be not enough food. But the Bible and history also uses the word famine simply to mean that there wasn't enough food to go around because of a situation. And so that is somewhat understandable if the plantings had not been able to be harvested, or maybe what was supposed to be planted wasn't able to be planted at all, because many of the men in the families had to go to the city in order to work there on the construction and the security for the city and for the wall, and were unable to carry out their normal duties in providing food for their families, tending to the crops. And so what we have here is a real bad situation, not just for these families, but also for the rest of the community. Where one goes in ancient cultures, the entire tribe goes. Making people slave labor for God's cause has consequences. What we've said here over the past few days is that Nehemiah has leveraged this as being God's ordained plan to build this wall. Nehemiah has pushed off resistance as being ungodly and ridiculous, both from within the community as well as from outside of the community. He has essentially turned the entire community of people into a slave labor force to finish this wall project as quickly and as efficiently as possible, which means he's over-relying on his fellow countrymen. The tone here in this dialogue in Nehemiah really hints back to the slave labor in Egypt. And so there is a sense here in this passage and in the feelings of maybe a resurrection of some level of PTSD from the stories and the collective memories of Egypt and slavery and taskmasters and Pharaoh. And now history is repeating itself, except it's not Pharaoh, it's now Nehemiah, one of their own. And not only that, but it's Nehemiah who's leveraging this labor by God's word himself. This has consequences. Even today, we still oftentimes see people becoming a labor force in ways that are detrimental to the individual on behalf of God's cause. Yesterday I talked a little bit about volunteers, but this happens to employees of religious systems, volunteers within religious systems, and oftentimes even the members and attenders in faith communities end up being over-leveraged for seemingly holy causes in ways which are unholy. That has consequences. Whenever we abuse human beings, there is a negative consequence to doing that. Faith communities, God's people, and the church should be perhaps best practices people when it comes to how we utilize resources, financial resources, and human resources as well. Unfortunately, that's not often the case. Oftentimes, the church mirrors in the worst ways the culture around it, rather than setting culture and allowing the world around it to see the wisdom in following best practices of God's law, rather than best practices of corporate America. Others, though, said, we've mortgaged our fields, vineyards, and homes to get food during the famine. And so they were in such difficult straits that they had to set up a mortgage on their fields, on their vineyards, on their homes to get food during the famine. And now they have no way to pay those debtors, those creditors. Others, though, said, we've had to borrow money on our fields and vineyards to pay our taxes. Remember, they're living under Persian rule, so they were sending taxes off to Persia as a requirement for being a part of the Persian system and receiving the resources. We belong to the same family as those who are wealthy, and our children are just like theirs. Yet we must sell our children into slavery just to get enough money to live. And this was something that happened oftentimes in ancient times, was if you could not pay off a debt and you had no collateral in order to satisfy that debt, well, your children would become that collateral, being sold into slavery in order to pay that debt, indentured servitude. We've already, some of them said, sold our daughters, and we are helpless to do anything about it, for our fields and vineyards are already mortgaged to others. This is the group of people who have returned from captivity and are now in a different sort of captivity. They have had to, because of this building project of Nehemiah's, go into debt. They've no food to eat, no money to pay for it. They've already sold or mortgaged or given away everything that they can, and now are giving away their children as slaves in order to try to provide for themselves, and ends still aren't meeting. The Bible talks about this type of situation as being usury. Usury is interest on loans, and the Bible said in the law of the Old Testament that Israelites were not allowed to charge interest on loans. That was usury. The idea of charging interest was forbidden in the law of Moses. You can go back to Exodus 22 and see that because all of the Jews are members of one family. So it was wrong to charge interest on a loan that was within the family. And the Jewish people, unlike our culture today, really used and thought of the word family as being the entire community of people. And so you can charge interest on loans. All that you could do is collect collateral or take someone as an indentured servant in order to pay off a debt. Now, it's interesting, this idea of family, because if we go back to verse 4 and 5, the argument that's used in order to complain about the usury is that we belong to the same family. It's fascinating here that they don't point to this idea of the expectations are too much on the wall. They don't point to the idea here that there's a famine in the land. They don't point to this idea that there should not be wealthy among us and poor among us. The argument against what's going on in the situation that they're in is that this is no way to treat family. Which, just kind of gets you right here, right? It's a very compelling argument. They're not arguing that we don't owe the money. They're not arguing that you're wrong for expecting us to pay our debts. What they're arguing here is that we belong to family, and there should be things that are just outside of bounds for people who are family. And I think the hint here is, why are there people who are wealthy and have excess and people who aren't, to the point of having to sell off children and be hungry and die of starvation? If we're family, there's something not right about that. If you saw a family member, a child, a brother, a sister who were in this type of situation and you had extra resources, would you not gladly assist and give out of your excess? Many wouldn't. And that's not God's way whenever we act that way. And this is a problem. In fact, the wealthy people were the ones who had created this situation in large part of usury, which is against the law, in order to line their pockets on the backs of the financial and physical struggle of the poor. What's going on here is a situation that not only isn't good economic practice in a society, especially one that's fledgling and struggling like this, but also just isn't good faith practice either. Pay attention to how people treat you, and believe them the first time. You see, I think that oftentimes we get into this, I'll use faith communities again as an example. We get into this idea that we're family, and we all love each other, and we're community. And so if you don't like the way somebody's treating you, keep your mouth shut. We're all community. We're all family. Don't complain about that. Be quiet. I don't want to hear you complain about working too hard or you're in need and you need food and you're struggling, but these people who are sitting 2 or 3 pews over from you don't. They've worked hard and earned what they've gotten. Why aren't you working as hard? Treatment of other human beings, especially in a family, is important. And the Bible doesn't dismiss this idea of thinking of a religious community as being a family. In fact, the New Testament in the era of Jesus and the early church picks up this idea of family and actually doubles down on it as if to say, yeah, this wasn't just important in the Old Testament and in Nehemiah, but this is the key and critical way in which we should see ourselves, the lens through which we should see each other through. If people in a community of faith aren't going to treat you like family, if they're going to overwork you, if they're going to abuse you, if they're not going to help take care of you out of their excess, out of their resources, pay attention to that, believe them the first time, and get out. Don't allow it. Cry foul. Would you allow that in a family? Would you allow a brother or a sister to treat you in this way? Would you just accept it? You shouldn't. And you shouldn't in the family of God either. In fact, the early church in Acts 2:42 through 46, if you read how they brought everything together that they had and then distributed so that all those who are in need would be taken care of. This is the idea that the people who are crying foul here in Nehemiah are getting at. They're paying attention to the way other people who are supposed to be their family, their neighbors, are treating them financially, physically, practically. And they're saying, we're talking a lot about God and building this wall and in the things that we're doing, but we're not acting much like God. And that's not okay. So tomorrow, what we're going to see is Nehemiah's reaction. And we've admittedly been a little, I wouldn't say harsh, but we've taken a good hard look at a lot of what Nehemiah has done and what he has leveraged in order to make sure that this wall happens. And it's going to be very interesting to see how Nehemiah deals in responding to this situation, because every previous situation that has come up, Nehemiah has brushed over, has glossed over, has put under the rug, and has said, the wall and only the wall is what matters. So tomorrow we'll see where it goes with Nehemiah. And until then, happy reading.